We're proud to announce CISO Stories, a new podcast series in partnership with Cybersecurity Collaborative and Cybereason. CISO Stories features the candid perspectives and experiences of frontline senior security executives and dives deep into timely security topics. CISO Stories is hosted by Todd Fitzgerald, VP of Cybersecurity Strategy at Cybersecurity Collaborative, and Sam Curry, Chief Product and Security Officer at Cybereason. Listen weekly as they speak with extraordinary CISOs by visiting securityweekly.com/CSP. Every 11 seconds, there's a new ransomware attack. Oil pipelines, universities, corporations, all paying millions of dollars. Barracuda says, don't pay the ransom. Before a ransomware attack occurs, train your teams to recognize an attack and use anti-phishing technology. Protect your applications, and they can't get onto your network. Simple backup and restore solutions quickly recover your data without paying the ransom. Build your ransomware protection plan now by visiting securityweekly.com/Barracuda. That's securityweekly.com/Barracuda. Cybersecurity is about more than just technology. It's about how people behave with emails, data, and cloud applications that directly impacts your company's security posture. Security works best when it's ingrained in the culture of your organization. To learn how to build a security culture and transform your employees from targets into a strong line of defense, head to securityweekly.com/Proofpoint and visit their Cybersecurity Awareness Center.
Welcome back to Business Security Weekly. I am your host, Matt Alderman, joined by Jason Albuquerque and Ben Carr. Don't miss any of your favorite Security Weekly content. Visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to any of our podcast feeds and have all new episodes downloaded right to your phone. You can also join our mailing list, Discord server, and follow us on social media and our streaming platforms. Join us in our next live webcast on October 21st to learn why zero-knowledge encryption matters. Then join us November 4th to learn about pragmatic steps to reduce your software supply chain risk. Visit securityweekly.com/webcast to save your seat. Please don't forget to check out our library of on-demand webcasts and technical trainings by visiting securityweekly.com/on-demand. This segment is sponsored by Appgate. To learn more, please visit securityweekly.com/Appgate. Jason Garbus is Chief Product Officer for Appgate, responsible for the company's security product strategy and product management, and co-chair of the SDP Zero Trust Working Group at the Cloud Security Alliance, where he helps lead research and publication initiatives. He has over 30 years of product management, engineering, and consulting experience at security and technology firms, including RSA, where he focused on identity management and governance products. It's also where Jason and I first worked together. Jason, welcome to Business Security Weekly.
Great to be here, Matt. Looking forward to this.
Now, a little story, I have to say this, right? So when we were at RSA together, I remember the days of us going through our public speaking training sessions. I know you remember those sessions because we did like 3 of them, I think, in the tenure that we were at RSA together. And who would have thought that I would be hosting a podcast with you coming on to talk on it?
Funny how things work out, but if I recall correctly, you passed with flying colors, so it helped.
I did go on to do a couple keynotes, so I did get a little bit of practice. We're going to talk Zero Trust Network Access, and Zero Trust has been a really, really hot topic lately. I want to start with a definition of Zero Trust Network Access, primarily of what it is, and more importantly, what isn't it?
Sure. So we kind of have to build this up piece by piece, because clearly Zero Trust has become a buzzword of the industry. And I think you remember at the last RSA conference, you could practically walk down to the commissary and buy a Zero Trust ham sandwich at the Moscone Center. There's Zero Trust is plastered over everything. So let's take this step by step, right? Zero Trust is a security philosophy and approach built on core principles around ensuring that the right users, no matter where they are in the world, no matter what device you're using, and no matter what type of resource they're trying to access, that they get the right level of access in a way that's very precisely controlled, in a way that is dynamic, and in a way that is transparent to them. And of course, in a way that is secure, so that the network traffic is encrypted and private. And really, all of this is predicated on zero trust or zero trust architecture, providing a holistic platform for using device and user and identity context to then make these dynamic policy decisions that get enforced through these enforcement points across your distributed network. And the end result of this is, as a user, I just turn on my device, I authenticate somewhere along the way, and maybe I'm prompted for MFA appropriately, but I just get access to my resources anymore. And I do so in a way that keeps me fully productive, but enforces the principle of least privilege, so that if I'm malicious or if I click on a phishing link and I get some malware on my device, I don't have full access across the network. And behind this is some really interesting machinery that I think we can talk about, where you have these zero trust enforcement points and a policy decision engine that assimilates and consolidates all of this contextual information about me and my device in the network, and then makes decisions about what I should be allowed to access based on all those attributes.
Now, some people would say ZTNA is like, it's just remote access only, but that's not necessarily true either, right?
It's really not. And one of the fundamental principles of zero trust is that it really needs to be a policy model and an enforcement mechanism that works for all users regardless of location. I think one of the biggest mistakes that we have in our legacy, our IT and security infrastructure, is that we have these siloed solutions for on-premises users who use layer 2 802.1x-based NAC solutions, and remote users who use VPNs, which, by the way, aren't security solutions, they're remote access solutions. So you ended up with these siloed pieces of technology and these siloed enforcement models. And most importantly, a siloed set of teams and a siloed set of policies, so that you now have completely different worlds for controlling and modeling access when someone's on-prem versus remote. And that's introduced a lot of gaps and friction in the organizations. And clearly, it hasn't worked at all in the last year and a half, when you have users who are all remote, and literally your on-premise security solutions have been providing no value for them whatsoever.
Right. So when you think about a zero trust network access solution, you talk about policy, right? But like, what are all the things that have to come together? You've got a policy engine underneath. You need a way to authenticate users. You need a way to identify and control applications. I mean, it is managing a number of the components under the zero trust architecture solution, right? But then how do you do that in a more simplified way? Because this has been a challenge in the past, right? Like, which applications and which level of access do these people get? So the administration and the setup of this has been difficult. How do we address some of those complexities?
What a zero trust system does and should do is let people in an organization, first of all, have a vocabulary with which to collaborate across what were traditionally separate groups inside the organization: the identity team, the networking team, the security team, and the application teams. And to give them a way to say, okay, I know that I've got this group of individuals and they authenticate using this enterprise identity provider, and I've got, let's say, some basic groups that are set up there. That's really important input that needs to be part of a policy model that then lets you say, okay, I probably have a pretty good sense for who should be accessing which application, at the very least from an identity governance perspective, because that's kind of the baseline, if you will, for well-run or at least decently run organizations. And those things can and should be put into the zero trust enforcement model. And then you can build on that by saying, okay, great. Now we have some security controls that we need to add to this, like, is this on a corporate issue device? Is my antivirus solution running on there? I want to have maybe some geographic attributes that I tie into my policy model of making sure that people are in country, or we block attempts to access from countries in which we don't do any business and things like that. This can get very complicated. And this is why we encourage people, as they go down the zero trust journey, to really start with a focused set of use cases, to build momentum and start to build some experience inside their organizations for approaching this in a very different and much more holistic way, which, even though it sounds complicated, it actually simplifies things, because you end up with a single unified policy model across these different environments. And now you can say, great, I've got a policy. And you know what? It doesn't matter that part of my business application is running in traditional on-prem, hardware, and a new piece of it was in the process of moving up to a cloud-based infrastructure or platform as a service environment. And those things and those people have to access both those environments. Now they can do that transparently. And you really can very quickly, with zero trust, get to a point where you're enabling this kind of really interesting business innovation without sacrificing security or user productivity.
So
I'm really interested in hearing about the architecture, right? Because I mean, from your perspective, you're looking at identities, you're looking at devices and endpoints, ultimately with the goal of protecting data, applications, infrastructure, network, making sure people get the right access at the right time based on that criteria, and all knowing they could be anywhere in the world, right? So what's the architecture like? Is there a client on the endpoint? Are you using some type of policy controller? How are they actually connecting to those resources, whether on-prem or even if you could be a gateway between a software as a service instance like a Salesforce or a ServiceNow? What's that architecture look like?
Yeah, you touched on a lot of the components of what a zero trust architecture typically has, and I can talk about it from the perspective of how we've implemented it in our product. We follow what's called the software-defined perimeter architecture, and this architecture is an open specification created and published by the Cloud Security Alliance, and it and the zero trust philosophy are really well aligned with one another. So they're kind of two sides of the same coin, and what the architecture is set up of is, first of all, you can think of it as a centralized policy decision point, what's called the controller. And this uses a control plane to communicate with a set of distributed policy enforcement points. And you can think of those as gateways. And those gateways could be standalone elements on the network that run inline, and that tends to be the primary way that they're deployed. They can also be more compact software components that are deployed on an application host itself. That's also another model. Users would access this through a client that's installed on their device, whether it's a mobile device or a standard desktop or laptop, or through clientless options. That's also pretty typical in the vendor community. So you can think of what happens is you've got, let's take it from a user perspective. The user needs to authenticate through the controller to their enterprise identity provider. And of course, there's different mechanisms and protocols for doing that. The controller then says, great, I see that you've authenticated. I'm going to pull information about you from the identity provider, from your device, because I can do a posture check, as well as from other elements of my security ecosystem. Like maybe I pull some information from a CMDB or from an endpoint management system to get a risk profile for you. And then based on that, the policy engine then says, okay, now I've got a full picture of where you are in the world, what time of day it is, your device, et cetera. I'm going to make a decision about what you should be able to access. And then the controller utilizes this logical control plane to communicate those decisions out to a set of those policy enforcement points, those network gateways, if you will. And then the user gets secure encrypted connections from their device to those gateways. So it's connecting directly to those entry points. And then those gateways provide not only the ability to manage the network traffic, but also to do real-time policy enforcement by looking at things like time of day, or to enforce step-up authentication, or even to interrogate the workloads that are being accessed by the user to make sure that they match, or to look at, let's say, a cloud environment where you might have a very dynamic set of containerized or infrastructure as a service workloads, look at their metadata, and then make access decisions based on that. Does that help paint a picture, Jason?
Yeah, no, totally. And now, it starts my wheels spinning, right? And now I'm thinking, that gateway that may sit inside the network. I'm assuming traffic's going outbound over 443. But then I look at services, as a CIO and a CISO by trade, I start looking at services that need to be delivered to the end users. So is it bi-directional from the gateway? Because I think about services like voice services that need to be pushed to the end user, right? Versus that remote access into something. So talk to me a little bit about how those outbound services may come into play and how you're managing those.
Sure thing. One of the things that we decided when we put together our architecture based on SDP is that we wanted to give our customers, enterprises, the ability to have complete choice and control about how the network traffic is routed and what sorts of protocols and mechanisms they use. So we would, for example, the way our approach is architected is we do support server-initiated connections such as VoIP that would use either TCP or UDP to go down and establish a connection to the user's device. Some other architectures that might route stuff up through a vendor-managed cloud might not be able to handle that. And there's pros and cons to all of these as folks look at that. But we found that the architecture that supports the widest variety of protocols has really resonated with customers who have complex and messy and sometimes very difficult to understand enterprise network environments with overlapping IP addresses, really complicated DNS setups, and all sorts of other challenges.
Yeah. And I just look at the value this brings to the table, not only from your own end users, but from partners, vendors, consultants, so many third parties who need access to systems within your environment. This is a key player to protect, that remote access that you need from third parties, and really push those security policies downstream to them as well. Third-party vendor risk management is top of mind everywhere.
Yeah, exactly. And we've seen certainly the ability for users to access this in a clientless fashion is important because who knows what security controls or lack thereof your partners may have, number one. And number two, the ability to have, you can think of it as almost like a federated identity model where those users can actually authenticate into the system using their own existing identity provider is a nice way to tie into their onboarding and offboarding processes and to really have some referential integrity so that, if that third party transitions someone out or they leave, you don't have to have some sort of manual process to now revoke access in your environment or leave it inadvertently for months or years, as too often happens.
Right. And it's awesome to hear that you have some level of automation and orchestration around it too, like an old school NAC would have. You have some of that capability embedded in it as well. So that's great. The other question I have is telemetry, right? Knowing what you're gathering, there's a ton of telemetry available. Can you offload that as a log source to, let's say, a SIEM, where you can start looking at that telemetry, you can start looking at that user behavior and really leverage the power of the data that you're collecting?
Yeah, and that's something that we see a lot of customers do, especially since as an overlay network and one that authenticates users and ties it very strongly to their identity system, we provide the ability to send identity-enriched log information into an enterprise SIEM to do that kind of assimilation. And it really helps, number one, augment the SIEM with data that's collected directly from the endpoint and from the identity system. And number two, also disambiguate IP addresses as users traverse these complex enterprise networks. Too often, things get natted, and it's difficult for the SIEM to understand reliably which endpoint or which user was actually over here in Chicago was actually affecting this network and causing this access, over here in Dallas. Whereas the enriched data that we send gives them full visibility and full, very strong association with the actual end user and device.
Yeah, that's great.
What I like about the architecture is multiple controllers. To your point, I can have a controller specifically to a vendor, leveraging their identity access system. And then if the contract is over, I kill that controller, it kills all their access. So because we all know that we don't pull those identities out of our identity solutions fast enough, that's a great control point, right? I think the other thing here is the gateways. I'm assuming when we think about gateways, we're thinking they could be running in the cloud. They could be running within an application. They could be running on-prem. So again, the flexibility to understand based on your architectures, based on where you're running, what are the right types of gateways to have, and having that flexibility will be important, especially in a very hybridized world.
Yeah, so that's definitely the art side of deploying these things is understanding what the network setup is. And you look at the 2 or 3 ways that you could enforce these access control mechanisms, and working with our solution architects and understanding the trade-offs of the different approaches and deciding, okay, given what I know, I want to go this way to solve the problems that we're facing here. And then this network over here, maybe we'll take an entirely different approach because the challenges and the constraints are different. That's where it can get complicated, but it's also pretty interesting. And we think it really helps organizations look at this and say, okay, now that I've got these new capabilities, how do I actually simplify my network environment? Maybe I don't need to route all my traffic over an MPLS network. I can just set up these distributed gateways and have traffic go directly to it. And that's going to all of a sudden start to put in place like a virtuous cycle of reducing friction and simplifying things, and then accelerating things across the board.
Yeah, you said that's kind of the art of it, right? And I'm actually wondering a little deeper into what's the actual art versus science look like at trying to figure that out and determine how to come out of the legacy, architecture, move into something like this for many of the companies that you're talking to, right? There's a big impetus to change, But then, where the rubber meets the road is how easy it is to actually implement that change in a real world.
Yeah, and it's you can think about the siloed tools and some of the challenges that we've had over the last 20 or 25 years. It's going to take a while to kind of dig our way out of that hole. We really recommend that organizations find a focused initial project that they can start to deliver value in 30 or 60 days. And there tend to be lots of those lying around organizations, whether it's something like a simple VPN replacement or third-party access, or trying to solve the pain point of a new application that was created up in a cloud environment using completely incompatible networking or security methodologies versus what the on-premises in-place solutions are trying to impose on that. So organizations that do that will start with a cloud migration project or a particular area of pain around third parties, or maybe DevOps is another great example of something that requires automation and requires a solution that provides a rich API to be driven by that automation, are really good starting points. And they also help the Zero Trust team build these bridges in collaboration with other elements or other peers inside the organization. And by delivering value that quickly, it can then start to build a lot of momentum for these Zero Trust projects and the new architecture. And I think a security team will know that they're onto something special when you have additional groups or groups of users or application owners come to them and say, hey, I heard that you were really successful onboarding application X or user group Y. I want my folks to be next because we hate the VPN, or we have all sorts of problems with this other element over here.
Right. So let's walk through just a simple use case, right? I think the VPN replacement one is an interesting one because I think a lot of people really struggled with their VPN architectures during COVID, and people, going on-prem into remote. Now we've kind of got this hybridized environment. So just walk us through it at like a high level, like how would you approach a VPN replacement with a Zero Trust network access solution? Because I think that would give people like a really clear understanding of like, oh, I can do that. Because as you said, from there you can see the power of it. But what do people have to really plan out just to do a simple VPN replacement?
Okay, so the first thing I would say is get a clear picture of topologically what your network looks like, and let's paint a picture of a prototypical organization which is headquartered in Chicago and has 2 data centers, one in Atlanta and one in Dallas. And all 3 of those locations are connected by an enterprise wide area network running over MPLS, and it's probably not a very big pipe there. They would probably have a couple of VPN concentrators for load balancing or HA purposes in their Chicago headquarters, and everyone would connect to those. And then their network traffic would have to get routed across the WAN to the resources that they're accessing in any of those 3 locations. They also added some new cloud-based resources up in some IaaS clouds, so they've got a direct connect from their enterprise network up into those cloud environments as well. So pretty big flat enterprise network. The networking team has kind of given up and said, we have no idea who these people are or what they need access to, so everyone has access to everything, and we're just going to rely on authentication. That's a pretty common starting point. Or maybe they're using AD on-prem, or maybe they're using a SAML-based identity provider. And no one loves the VPN because it's slow, the user experience is terrible, and they have to remember to turn it on to access this resource and to turn it off to access that resource because it conflicts. So what if someone's in that situation? We would say, great, start with whatever group of users you want, and maybe it's your system administrators, maybe it's some business users. Deploy these policy enforcement points, these gateways, one, let's say a cluster of 2 at your headquarters, 2 in Atlanta, 2 in Dallas, and you can put some virtual ones up in your cloud environment at the entry point of those networks. And now you onboard those users, they authenticate through their existing identity provider, and you can very easily put some device posture checks in place if you want. And then immediately the user's traffic no longer has to transit the wide area network. It goes directly across the internet to those gateways, which then act as local policy enforcement points. So their traffic is going to be much faster, have much lower latency. And those enforcement points can also be tied to not only the group memberships or other identity attributes of the users, but it can also look at the attributes of the workloads themselves. So now you've got really much more restricted network access for those users compared to the wide open access that the VPN provides. That's a pretty simple, pretty straightforward project that a customer can onboard and get going in a pretty small number of weeks, maybe 2 weeks, maybe even less, depending on the complexity of the environment. But will immediately deliver value in terms of better user experience, better throughput, and immediately also start to reduce the load on the MPLS WAN, especially if some of these things are high bandwidth applications.
Mr. Albuquerque, we don't know any environment that looks like that, right?
Oh, no, not at all. The majority of environments that we deal with look like that. So now,
Exactly.
again, I mean, the value add in the use case is definitely there, right? We talk to customers all the time, and their biggest struggle with their remote workforce is having to manage the VPN and in the user experience. And this is a proof of concept that they could put in place, get a set of users out there using it. The user experience goes up, the security posture goes up. It's a no-brainer. And then from there, like you said, it's getting the other business units to buy in on the use cases, and then just adoption across the board. This is the future. VPN has had its day.
Not to mention the reduction in help desk tickets. We've seen folks reduce their access-related tickets by up to 75%, just because this is just a lot simpler and better than a VPN.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, better user experience, fewer tickets, and better performance, all in a couple weeks. There's value in them hills. So that's great.
No brainer.
Jason, thank you so much for joining us on Business Security Weekly.
Thanks for having me. This has been great.
To learn more about AppGate or how to implement Zero Trust Network Access, please visit securityweekly.com/AppGate. Thank you, everyone, for watching and listening. We'll see you next week on Business Security Weekly.